Jenn Sandercock has become a fixture around Wellington, has moved here recently, but in the short year or two that she and Ron have been here, you can see them everywhere. At every Wellingtaru, manning a place and sharing their knowledge of production and game design and history, or running Game Dev Adventures. If you guys haven't checked those out, please do. Jenn has done an amazing job. She's helped with GDAO. She's worked with multiple companies in Australia and New Zealand consulting. She has a great production blog on LinkedIn if you haven't followed that yet. And today she is going to wow us all by talking about, you can see it, worst practices. So with that incredibly optimistic cue up, welcome Jenn Sandercock.
Sweet, yes, so making games is hard. It's really hard to go from an idea to shipping it. There's plenty of stuff that's going to happen along the way. Well, why is it so hard? Well, you are trying to do innovative content with innovative gameplay. You're making software, which is probably going to have tons of bugs, and you're doing it with a team who has a lot of unique skills and aptitudes and personalities in there. All of this means that you're probably going to have a lot of bad predictions and lots of opportunity for worst practices, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So we are currently in the introductions. I am going to be talking worst practices. I've grouped them into 3 different categories, and then we'll do some conclusions at the end. But we're still in the intro. Who am I? I'm Jenn. I make games. I make lots of different types of games. I've been in the industry for about 17 years now. Here is a slide of pretty much all the games I've ever made, from tiny little game jam games and to like big AAA games that, singular AAA game that I worked on. On these, I did like a ton of different roles. I was like a programmer, a designer, I was a baker, I helped out on booths, I designed all kinds of different things. I was a voice actor on one, all sorts. But throughout all of it, I was actually a producer. I'm only more recently realized that I was a producer, but I was doing production throughout the whole of it without even recognizing it. So now I am a production consultant, and my goal is to help teams ship their games on time, on budget, with a happy and fulfilled team. So today we're talking worst practices. How are we going to talk about them? Well, I'm going to tell you what happened, and then I'll tell you how that happened, like how I actually got there to that position, why it was a bad thing, because it's not always obvious why this is actually a bad practice. I'll tell you how to recover if this happens to you, and then we'll talk about how to avoid. But first, a few caveats. This talk is not a list of the most common worst practices that happen in game development. It's kind of a checkpoint, a snapshot of a bunch of crap that one developer, i.e. me, has seen and done in their personal games career. It's meant to show you the breadth and depth of how much you can screw up while making games. But it's also hopefully going to give you some hope and practical advice so that you can and will survive the bad things that are happening, even if you're the one making those bad things happen yourself. So that is our introduction over. We are now going to get into our first category. Hopefully, yes, scope and vision. In our first example, once I spent so much time looking at calendar deadlines that I forgot to watch my budget. Oops. So the lesson here is don't focus on your timeline and ignore your budget. So what happened here? Well, I was working on a Kickstarter campaign for my Edible Games Cookbook. Those are games that you literally have to eat to play. I estimated how many pages my book was going to be. 300 sounds great, but it actually, when I was working on it, it turned out to be 400 pages because I was adding in a whole bunch of extra stuff for different dietary restrictions or different ways you could play. Sounded like a good thing, I was still on time, but actually those extra 100 pages meant I had to pay more for layout, I had to pay more for manufacturing those pages and shipping. The book was like 4 pounds, 2 kilos, I can't remember. Anyway, it was a very heavy book. But I still shipped on time, so I was like, this is great. Here on the left, you can see this was the budget I thought I was going to do for my Kickstarter at the beginning of my Kickstarter, and the budget on the right is what actually happened. So quite a big difference there. There was I was 48% over budget. So that was a really bad thing. I had to borrow money, and I could never make Edible Games again because I couldn't figure out how to make them profitable because so much over budget. But I did ship on time. So how do you recover as this happens to you? You should cut your scope. How do you avoid it? Well, you should start trying to track the costs that are going to affect future costs. So in digital games, that might mean if you have more characters, then you're probably going to need to have more animation for them later on. If you have more dialogue, you might need more translation and voice acting costs later on. You should track those things in your budget and also just generally check in on your budget and see how you're going. I think partly I just got overexcited. This is like my one chance to do this cookbook. Bad choice. In our next example, I once spent weeks coordinating making a gameplay trailer, only to realize just 1 week before release that we didn't have any music for it at all. How did that happen? Well, the lesson here is don't use good enough placeholder. How it happened? Well, we put in some placeholder audio that we had got from the internet, didn't have the rights for, sounded perfectly good. We timed a bunch of our stuff to fit this audio. So we're like, sounds good. We all forgot that we had to replace it. So this was bad because obviously our musicians had to custom create a track within a very short amount of time and record it, and it was quite a lot of work for them, and it was all my fault. How do you recover? Do what we do. Fix it as soon as you can, as soon as you recognize there's a gap there. How do you avoid this? Well, don't use temporary assets that are okay. Use like really awful things. Or if you do have to use something that's okay, put a visual warning that says temp, do not use. And this isn't just applicable for audio, it's also true of character names, of art in general, and also for code names or working titles for your game. Don't use something that you shouldn't ship with. In our next example, you have maybe heard that implementing doors in video games is actually very hard. Well, when I was a programmer, I found out that shipping a realistic elevator was even worse. Oops. So the lesson here is don't complicate your code unnecessarily. So this was while I was working on Thimbleweed Park. We had a whole bunch of special cases that we thought were essential to our design. There was a non-playable character. We had lights here and there. You could change between 5 different playable characters, and there was real-time puzzles. It was a lot going on, to be honest. We wasted time rewriting our code 3 times from scratch, and at release, where were the bugs found? In that part of the game. What a shock. And further, nobody noticed how cool this elevator was. None of the reviewers, no fans were like, wow, look at that elevator. I mean, they should have. Look at this elevator. Wow. Yeah, can't. So how do you recover from this? You should simplify. Rip out that code. We probably could have been totally fine with a cutscene rather than the complicated mess that we did have. How do you avoid? Design and programming need to talk early and often so that you can avoid this sort of thing. Simplify it. If you are going to do something complicated, make sure it's going to be something that people will see and go, wow, that's amazing, cool. That is all of our scope and vision examples. So the lessons here are don't focus on timeline and ignore budget. Don't use good enough placeholders. Don't complicate your code unnecessarily. Our next category is going to be roadmap and timeline. So, starting here, on many projects, people expect to build a section of the game from nothing to shippable in one fell swoop. The lesson here is don't plan assuming no iterations. So, how this happens, well, many people come up with this sort of plan. I'm going to do my first level, and then I'll do the second level, and then I'll keep going, and then I'll do a tiny bit of polish, and it'll ship. It'll be great. Sounds good. And so this is one of those ones where that does sound good, but it isn't actually good. It is bad because you can't see how your whole game fits together. Maybe as you're playing at one of those middle levels actually feels slow, doesn't quite work, and you'd like to throw it out. If you throw it out once you have final art and code and stuff, you spend a lot of time making something that you're now going to throw out. You also can't necessarily tell a particular level size before you get started on it. So you might say, I know that level's bigger. It's about 2 times as big as the others. But when you start, it might actually be 4 times as big. And then you're probably going to crunch. Further, if you're building along this way, by the time you get to your final level, it's going to be amazing. So much great art, so much great gameplay. But comparatively, that first level you built is probably not going to be up to scratch, and you're going to need to go back and polish that and all of the others to get up to that level that you got in the final one. So how do you recover? Stop polishing already. Aim for mediocre, aim for bad. Just get focused on trying to get the whole thing in so that you can see how it's feeling and then start cutting stuff. How do you avoid it? Build assuming at least 3 phases. So go for bad to begin with, then mediocre, and then go for okay, good. Maybe you can do some more passes if you would like. Cut lots of stuff early, and make sure you get any external stakeholders on board, because often external stakeholders want you to build where you're going, we've got a vertical slice, and then the next level's a vertical slice, and so on. So make sure you communicate with them that you don't want to build that way. In our next roadmap and timeline example, twice I was on teams where we thought we had finished our prototyping and pre-production phase, and so the team was directed to start creating polished assets. But then the design changed from underneath us. So to explain this a little bit better, the lesson here is don't start production phase early. And to explain this a bit more, I'm going to give a fake example. So imagine the design team says, we need a dragon. Team goes and builds said dragon. Then the design team says, no, we need a cat instead. What are you going to do? You've now got a really great dragon, and you've wasted a lot of time building that dragon. So how did this happen? Our team was following a timeline. We got to the date when we were supposed to finish pre-production, and we're like, cool, we must be in production now. But we were not in production. Why is it bad? Because pre-production and production have very different mentalities. In pre-production, you expect the ground to change underneath you, and you're not going to spend a lot of time polishing things, because you're like, well, we might throw it out next week, so who knows? When you're in pre-production, you might have a smaller team that's just working more dynamically. By the time you get to production, you're probably going to be hiring up like 3 more artists, programmers, whatever. But if you're hiring them and you're still not sure about your design, then you're wasting a lot of money on those people, and you may not have the work ready for them to start. You're also probably going to have bottlenecks in untested processes where you haven't figured out how are we actually making the art and putting it into the game. Oh, looks like one person's going to have to do everything. Oh, shoot, that's not going to be a great idea. And further, you probably haven't found what the fun is in your game, so you're building a bad game. How do you recover this? Well, stop implementing things that are uncertain. Lock just something in, anything really, and then get the team to work on that while the creative works on the next phase of things. Now, it sounds scary, but it is okay to sometimes allow the team to have nothing to work on. Sounds bad, but it's better than them working on stuff that you then have to throw out later. If possible, go back to pre-production or prototyping or whatever you want to call that. How do you avoid this? Don't use calendar dates to decide which phase you're in. Create a checklist that's an unambiguous list of we must do these things before we exit this phase. In our next example, this one happened relatively recently. I was cocky and I thought, I know about how to build a roadmap. This is great. It turns out you can never know too much about building roadmaps. So in this case, I forgot to build in the time to build back-end tools and systems. So that meant I set our team a 2-month milestone of in 2 months we will get to blah, blah, blah point. Everybody on the team said, sounds great, we'll do that. When we reached that 2 months, we were still at least another 2 months away from finishing. So the lesson here is don't ignore the time to build your back end. Okay, so why did I fall into this trap? Well, because other teams I'd worked with already had a bunch of tools in place. They already had code architecture on top of their engine to do. And they had team members who had worked together before, so they knew how they wanted to make the game. So basically, all this baseline work was done. And the other thing that happened was nobody caught all of my bad assumptions. Nobody said, Jen, where's the time to build the tools? Where's that in your plan? Oops. So it was bad because we'd really only just started making this game and we were already behind, which meant we were going to have to cut scope before we'd even really got doing anything. How do you recover? Figure out what is going to be blocking your process and work on that first. So that might be your tools, for example. And you should try to add tools to milestone deliverables. They're not glamorous, like we're going to have art for something, but they're essential to be able to make the game. And of course, you should cut scope. How do you avoid this? Well, do not assume that you are going to be able to start making your game straight from the get-go. Ask a bunch of questions all up here. The more no's that you have in answer to these questions, the more prep time you're going to need to build team culture, processes, and tools. You can do a lot of this before the core team actually starts so that you don't have to be paying a lot of people while you're figuring this stuff out. If you don't have answers to all of these questions, ask your programmers. If your programmers don't know, give them time to figure this out before you commit to any sort of timeline with an external stakeholder. Okay, next example. So this thing happened on 5 different projects, so this is pretty common. And I'm just going to go straight into the lesson. The lesson is don't give too much or too little information for deliverables. So, how this happened. So in the 2 cases where there was too much information, the teams didn't want to have ambiguity. They forgot how much plans just change while you are making a game. In the 3 cases where there was too little information, which is generally the more common case, those teams didn't notice the ambiguity that they had around, like, which content are we delivering? How far, like, what's our quality bar that we're aiming for? And they also there was assumptions about, well, if I say one thing, you understand it to mean the same thing as me. Definitions weren't the same. So why is it bad? Well, when you give too much information, it means then if you're working with a publisher, you might at the beginning of a milestone say, we are going to give you the lava level at the end of this milestone. And then at the end of the milestone, you're like, ooh, actually, we did the snow level instead. Sorry, hey. And so it kind of makes it look like you don't know what you're doing because you're changing what you're delivering to them constantly. With too little information, one team I worked with had a milestone the next week. They didn't know which levels they were delivering that week. They hadn't chosen them. People didn't know like what quality bar to go for, so people kept polishing quality way beyond what you needed. And in one case, we delivered an alpha build to a publisher. The publisher then said, oh, but your alpha build doesn't have XYZ. And we said, no. And it turned out they had a totally different definition to us. And so they're like, well, your alpha build has failed without us knowing anything. And we had done exactly what we wanted to do. So in all of these sorts of cases, you're not going to know how long until you're going to finish because there's too much ambiguity about what you're trying to aim for. So in both of these cases, it's bad because there's mismatched expectations, and it's mismatched expectations with publishers, and publishers are the people who are going to pay you. When they get upset, that's a really bad thing. So how do you recover? Look for ambiguity or over-precision. Fix any future deliverables, check in with your team, internal team, and then get the external approval from your publisher. How to avoid this? I recommend using percentages and approved definitions of done. So that might mean alpha build means this for art, this for programming, and it will have these things in it. The percentages part might be another deliverable might mean we have 50% of our characters sketched. Before you start work on a specific milestone, you would then choose which percentage who are you actually doing? So if it's 50% of characters, then you're like, we will do Bob, Jane, whatever, name all of those people. You only share that internally. Do not share that with your publisher because you might change your mind as you go through and realize one character makes more sense to do right now. So these are all of our roadmap and timeline lessons. So don't plan assuming no iteration. Don't start production phase early. Don't ignore the time to build the back end, and don't give too much or too little information about your deliverables. Our final category here is team culture, one of my favorites, right? So, on this first example, one team I worked with wanted to make decisions as a collective. It sounded really good, but the result was almost no decisions were made. So the lesson here is don't avoid making decisions. And I'm going to give a real example of what this is. So the team, the question is your alpha build due before or at the beginning or the end of your alpha phase? Now, the games industry seems to be a little bit split on it. It doesn't actually matter which you choose, as long as everybody on your team knows and your publisher knows as well. It shouldn't take 6 months to come up with a decision to this one. So how did it happen? Well, they didn't want to have a single leader who was in charge of everyone. They wanted all of the discipline leads to be able to decide together. But of course, if one person disagreed, we're like, oh, we'll decide it later. We'll decide it later. And it was just always later. It was bad, long repetitive meetings, arbitrary decisions, just got stuck in limbo for 6 months, ridiculous. So how do you recover? Try to do a gut check. How much do people care? What's the impact going to be? If it's not going to be very much, just anybody on your team needs to make a decision and you can all move on to something that actually is worthwhile deliberating on. How do you avoid this? Well, you could have a single project leader. If that's not going to work for you, maybe try to nominate for, say, the art lead is in charge of art decisions. That can still be a little bit ambiguous, but try to have ways to plan to escalate and make decisions. Make sure you're doing those gut checks to see if the decisions are taking too long, and make sure everybody on your team is watching out and going, hey, it's actually been 2 months and we still haven't made a decision about that thing. We should just make a decision. In our next example, I've given the spoiler already, but once I helped hire a producer only to basically ignore all of their advice. So don't hire a producer too late. The first caveat is I didn't identify as a producer myself at the time. And how this happened was the team was running out of time. And everybody's like, you should hire a producer, that will help you. But we actually liked all of our processes and we didn't really want anybody to come in and change them, and we didn't need anyone to run them for us. So it was bad because then the producers' hands were tired and they couldn't actually do their job. How do you recover from this? You need to ask, do you actually need a producer? I would say most people probably do need a producer, but you check this. You need one if you want to change your processes or there's like some sort of process such as running meetings that nobody else wants to run and you need somebody to do that. If you realize you do need a producer, support that person. Make sure they can get the changes that they need to, but also be honest about what you don't want changed so they don't attempt to try to change things that you have no interest in changing whatsoever. And if you don't need a producer, let them go. It's not fair to keep somebody in a job where they can't actually do their job. How do you avoid this? Hire a producer earlier, and then they can help you set up your processes in a good way. Or don't hire if you're not planning to change anything and you're happy with how everything is right now. In our next example, once I had a jerk boss, and he told me a story about his jerk boss that basically sounded like my story in the sense. So don't forget that you might be the jerk boss right now. So how this happened, my jerk boss clearly had been in my shoes. They couldn't believe they were anything like their jerk boss. They were totally different to their jerk boss. So they just couldn't see themselves in the story that they were saying and couldn't see themselves as the jerk boss in the story. It was bad because I assumed my jerk boss was trying to be more relatable. It totally didn't work, pushed me away from them, and I eventually quit because of that person. So how do you recover? You should ask your direct report, how can I help you? If you're struggling to deal with a direct report, talk to other people. Maybe it's them who's the problem, but maybe it's you who's the problem. If you are being a jerk, talk to other people to try to help become less of a jerk, more of the time. Less is more. How do you avoid this? Well, remember, everybody's a jerk sometimes. Yes, even you and me. But you shouldn't be a jerk all of the time. So try to check your behavior, the impact of your behavior on other people. Read books, post on Am I the Arsehole? Because you just might be the arsehole. Okay, in our next example, we are getting towards the end here. I once worked with a colleague who was a misogynist jerk. Yes, another story about a jerk. Instead of that misogynist jerk being told to change their ways, my bosses told me that I needed to be more open about other people's cultures. So the lesson here is don't retain bad team players. So what happened? My bosses wanted to have a multicultural, remote-based team, but they kind of forgot that jerks' behaviour probably wouldn't have been acceptable in their own country in a workplace at all. My bosses wanted to be nice and not fire people because Jerk's family was reliant on Jerk's salary, and they knew a lot about Jerk and cared a lot about Jerk. So why was it bad? I felt abandoned and eventually I quit, not just because of this person in that case. But so basically by my bosses being nice to Jerk and not firing Jerk, it meant the rest of us, like they were being jerks to the rest of us. We couldn't really have a good cohesive team because this one person can kind of just do whatever the heck they wanted to. So how to recover? If you are a boss being told about somebody who's a jerk, listen to the victim, make sure you talk to the jerk because maybe there's like two sides to every story. Talk to other people on the team and try to help people reduce their jerky behaviours. Do not try to tell a victim to deal with it on their own. It won't work. How do you avoid this? Well, you should establish a work culture for the entire team and make sure you enforce it. So nobody should be above this work culture that you have. You need to have consequences, such as possibly firing, for jerky behaviour. In our final example today, getting to the end. So, I once got told that I was jeopardising my career by bringing in cake for afternoon tea once a week. Yeah, kind of ridiculous. The lesson here is don't believe team socials are bad for productivity. So what happened from my perspective was I was new to the team. They all looked miserable. They'd been crunching forever, it seemed. I liked baking. I wanted to meet more people. And also that helped me be good at my job. My job at the time was, part of it was triaging new bugs coming in and sending them to the correct person in the correct department. From my boss's perspective, what was happening was deadlines were being missed. There was a lot of pressure to fix more bugs. The higher-ups kept seeing these emails from Jenn about cake day, like all of the time. Surely the whole team's slacking off forever, even though it was just once a week. And those same higher-ups believe that if you're not at your desk, you can't be working. This was, I stopped making cake day. This was the last cake I made, and I never got to eat it because I was too scared and was worried I would jeopardise my career. So why was it bad? Team morale plummeted, particularly mine. Productivity didn't improve or didn't change. People couldn't have casual conversations about work problems over a nice afternoon tea, and I didn't know who to send bugs to, so I got worse at my job. How do you recover? You should check your productivity assumptions. So try to look at those stats that you care so much about. My bosses cared a lot about how many bugs are fixed every day. So I went into the stats and I found out that more bugs were fixed on cake day than any other day on average. But then my boss wanted me to guarantee that, so oops. Okay, how do you avoid this? Build optional socials into routines. If you're in person, cake day, it's a great idea. You can also do cross-disciplinary one-on-one buddies. So that might mean hooking up an artist with a programmer so different people on the team can connect about a non-work sort of thing. And if somebody steps up to take the initiative, do not pull them down. So here are all the lessons. Don't avoid making decisions. Don't hire a producer too late. Don't forget you might be the jerk boss now. Don't retain bad team players, and don't believe team socials are bad for productivity. So we are now at conclusions. Finally, I've got a little bit left. So am I a bad producer? I've told you a lot of stories about things that I have done badly and done wrong. It's totally normal to make mistakes. What's important is to recognize your mistakes as soon as possible, recover from them, and hopefully you might be able to learn from some of my mistakes. Overall, you should stay calm, breathe. Don't panic. Focus on what actually is important and cut the rest. Take shortcuts. There is no perfect game production process at all. There's just something that's going to work for you right now. Don't be a jerk, or at least don't be a jerk every day. And then you can get in touch with me. I have an advice blog, as Rick said. It's a written one, audio one, or video, depending on your format that you would like. So thank you very much.